Here with Taryn Murphy, Taylor Tagliavia, and Jake Kresse. We are students at UW-Madison and are here on behalf of the Nelson Institute capstone course, Building Resilience to Heat. Today we will be discussing how the living conditions in Wisconsin prisons are drastically worsened by inadequate cooling mechanisms. These poor conditions are amplified as climate change causes more extreme heat. Prisons in Wisconsin that have air conditioning report keeping temperatures between 80 and 84 degrees Fahrenheit. One study demonstrated that this is the hottest recorded set temperature out of all responding jurisdictions. Comparatively, prisons in Massachusetts keep cells at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. To add to this issue, Wisconsin's prison population is 22,896 individuals. Its prison system is only designed for a capacity of 17,633. Overcrowding combined with heat has negative effects on physical and mental health. We believe that existing prisons and jails need to be kept at temperatures that ensure the safety and well-being of both the staff and incarcerated individuals. If the state decides to build a new prison or jail, there must be certain standards in place that ensure access to air conditioning. We have 3 speakers today: Shar-Ron, Buie, the Associate Director of JustDane; Mark Rice, who serves as the coordinator of the Wisconsin Transformational Justice Campaign at Wisdom; and James Morgan. We will be taking questions at the end after all the speakers have finished. At this time, I would like to introduce Shar-Ron Buie.
Thank you so much, Cosette. Good afternoon. I stand before you today to address a matter that affects not only the residents of Wisconsin's correctional facilities, but also the taxpayers who fund them. The perilous issue of temperature regulation within our state prisons. Now, this problem transcends mere discomfort. It is a matter of public health, safety, and fiscal responsibility. In Wisconsin's correctional facilities, the ambient temperatures, as Cosette so adequately pointed out, is ostensibly controllable by the residents themselves, who often resort to blocking air vents in a desperate attempt to adjust their environment. However, the reality is starkly different. Temperatures are controlled from a centralized location, often arbitrarily and capriciously decided on by the officer on duty. In facilities without air conditioning, summer temperatures frequently soar to dangerous levels, with some individual cells reaching temperatures higher than 97 degrees Fahrenheit. And even in prisons with cooling systems, temperatures are kept between 80 and 84 degrees, and this is a range far above what is considered safe for vulnerable populations. Now, this lack of effective climate control poses a grave danger. A study published in March in PLOS 1 links extreme heat to elevated mortality rates in the United States prisons, particularly in regions like the Northeast, where Wisconsin's climate parallels during peak summer months. For every 10-degree increase above average, deaths in prison rise by over 5%, with heart-related heart disease fatalities showing a staggering 6.7% increase. Additionally, a mere 2-day heat wave can spike mortality rates by up to 21% in vulnerable populations. Let me repeat that. A mere 2-day heat wave can spike mortality rates by up to 21% in vulnerable populations. Also, in Wisconsin as a whole, the #1 cause of death for the overall population, prison and non-prison, is cardiovascular disease exacerbated by heat effects. So these statistics are alarming, especially when you consider that Wisconsin's prison population is aging at an unprecedented rate. Since 1990, Wisconsin's incarcerated population aged 55 years and older has grown from 176 individuals to over 3,500 prisoners. Many of these older adults suffer from chronic medical conditions, including asthma, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and hypertension. Moreover, a significant number of incarcerated persons are prescribed psychotropic medications, which severely impair the body's ability to regulate heat. These factors create a perfect storm of vulnerability. Heat-related illnesses are not just a Southern problem. They are now a Midwest crisis. And this crisis is exacerbated by insufficient climate control measures in our correctional facilities. Furthermore, the cost to taxpayers extends beyond potential lawsuits and medical expenses. Research conducted by the Wisconsin School of Business indicates that high temperatures increase violent incidences in prison by up to 20%. Now, I would like for you all to consider how you feel on a burning hot summer day. And this contributes to a more dangerous environment for both those who are incarcerated and the staff who are there to supervise them. When violent interactions rise, so do operational costs, as additional resources are required to address these potentially dangerous and deadly conflicts. It is imperative to recognize that investing in adequate climate control systems is not merely an expense. It is a cost-saving measure in the long term. Heat-related lawsuits, such as the recent $9,000 settlement involving a Wisconsin prisoner, underscore the financial liability we all face if we fail to act. Moreover, the health complications resulting from excessive heat place a preventable additional burden on our healthcare infrastructure, further straining precious, rare public resources. Now, states like Massachusetts, as Cosette said, they have set a standard by maintaining prison temperatures at a reasonable 68 degrees, demonstrating that humane and efficient climate control is achievable. Wisconsin, we must follow suit, not just for the well-being or the comfort of the incarcerated, but for public safety and fiscal prudence. Now, for the record, the status of temperature regulation devices in Wisconsin DOC stands as follows. Waupun and New Lisbon, they have no air conditioning in their cells. So I'd like for you to imagine a box in which you are stuck in the summertime, and all you have is a fan, and it is you and another person inside that cell for 23 hours per day. That's the condition of the individuals who are there. Now, the following institutions will have some services in the next year: Stanley Correctional, the Wisconsin Secure Program Facility, Dodge Correctional Facility. They will all have air tempering systems in their health services units. So in other words, you must become ill to go to a place where your temperature is regulated. Lincoln Hills and Copper Lake and the Southwest Regional Care Facility for Youth will have air tempering inside their classrooms. Now, I want you to imagine, particularly those students here, sitting inside a classroom and trying to learn, and you're sitting in 80 to 90 degree heat. So there's a call to action here today. This is not just an opportunity to impart some of this information. The status quo is untenable, and I think we all should urge the Wisconsin Department of Corrections to implement some of these immediate reforms, including installing modern air tempering systems in all state correctional facilities, establishing standardized safe temperature ranges overseen by independent audits, and prioritizing vulnerable populations, those individuals who are 55 years and older who have comorbidities, such as those with chronic illnesses, through targeted health and cooling initiatives. Now, these measures are not luxuries. I cannot stress that enough. This is not about comfort. This is not about luxury. They are necessities. They reflect our collective commitment to justice, safety, and the judicious use of taxpayer dollars. Let us remember that how we treat the least among us speaks volumes about our society as a whole. Thank you. I will answer questions after lunch.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Rice. I currently serve as the Transformational Justice Campaign Coordinator with Wisdom, Wisconsin. I'm also a founding member of the Just Us Coordinating Council. That's a national table focused on policy that is led by directly impacted people, the first national policy table led by directly impacted people. And so I want to start off by saying that all people deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. Unfortunately, the current policies and practices of the Wisconsin Department of Corrections are preventing that from happening far too often. extreme heat is one example. Forcing people to live in extreme heat is a form of torture. There have been other forms of torture that we've been fighting. Long-term lockdowns are torture. Solitary confinement is torture. There's been a long history in this country of not recognizing the humanity of people with conviction records and currently incarcerated people. For example, during Hurricane Katrina, there was a plan to save the lives of cats and dogs, but there was no plan to save the lives of people who were incarcerated during that hurricane. And we're seeing that continue on all throughout this country. And I'm speaking from firsthand experience about this issue. I've been incarcerated in county jails all across the country. I've been incarcerated in county jails in Arizona, New Mexico, Tennessee, Indiana. I've also been incarcerated in numerous county jails across the state of Wisconsin. The state of Wisconsin forced me to spend almost 3 years in the state of Wisconsin prison system. And so I can definitely speak from firsthand experience that the extreme heat in those places is torture, and it needs to stop. It's unacceptable. And one of my colleagues, James Wilborn, died due to heat exhaustion in Milwaukee Secure Detention Facility in 2015. James Wilborn was a leader of the Transformational Justice Campaign. He was a leader really on the issue of reincarceration for revocations with no new offense. He experienced that several times. And was very passionate about conditions of confinement. And so he was an older gentleman. And at the time he was forced to spend some time in Milwaukee Secure Detention Facility. He was there for an allegation, not for a new crime, and wasn't able to get access to medications that he needed. It was very hot. There was no air conditioning in the unit he was in, and he died due to heat exhaustion in 2015. And that really prompted us to really prioritize this issue of inhumane treatment, inhumane conditions. We also launched a campaign to depopulate and close Milwaukee Secure Detention Facility, one of the most inhumane prisons in the United States. It gets very hot in there. The ventilation has been very poor. It's a building within inside of a building, so the air circulation is very poor, and so it can feel, if it's 90 degrees outside, it can feel 20, 30 degrees hotter within the facility, and it was overcrowded at the time. So overcrowding is another huge issue that I want to address. And with James, I just want to share a bit about his story to humanize him more too. So James was the prayer warrior of an organization called Table of the Saints. He was known for calling people up, guys. We call guys up at 3, 4 in the morning and ask people one thing: can I pray for you? He was really like a person that was really strong community leader. As I said, was really an organizer, leader in the fight for justice in Wisconsin. Had been involved with Wisdom, Micah, the affiliate of Wisdom in Milwaukee, and was really, instrumental in building Table of Saints, which is a reentry services organization in Milwaukee, similar to JustDane, offers some of those same services, but more from a faith-based perspective. So I want to say that first and foremost, right now, there's a public health emergency. It's a public health crisis that we're facing within the Wisconsin prison system. And it's time to really start to invest in health instead of torture. It's time to invest in health instead of excessive punishment. And the first thing that we can do to save lives is to immediately bring down the prison population. Immediately, we need to reduce the prison population. And there's several elected officials, several public officials that have the power to do that immediately. For example, Governor Evers has the power to commute sentences, which he's not used that power at all yet. And when he first ran for governor, he promised to work with organizations like Wisdom to cut the prison population in half, and has not followed through with that promise. Hasn't used his power to cut the prison population through commutations. The Wisconsin State Legislature has power to push legislation forward to reduce the prison population. The Wisconsin Department of Corrections can immediately bring the population down by reducing the number of people sent back to prison for revocations with no new offense, for allegations. And that's one of the primary drivers of mass incarceration in Wisconsin. Mass supervision is driving mass incarceration. We need to end the practice of sending people back for allegations, for what we call revocations with no new offense. And that can literally save lives. When we're reducing the prison population, right now, due to the current conditions of confinement, the excessive heat, other horrific conditions of confinement in many prisons throughout the state of Wisconsin, getting people out of there immediately is the right thing to do. It's the just thing to do. And unfortunately, people are not taking that action. There's been so many opportunities in the state to move forward, common sense decarceration, and the state has been unwilling to do that at many different points along in history. And so that's number one. I want to share a bit about our Justice Reinvestment platform with Wisdom. So we have a campaign called Justice Reinvestment. Our first demand is no new prisons. So we mentioned there's a lot of talk about building a new prison in Green Bay or possibly a prison to replace Waupun. Number one, no new prisons. Second, we have a decarceration platform that if we move this platform forward, it's going to cut the state's prison population in half. And the primary policies are expanding treatment alternatives to incarceration on the front end through the state's treatment alternatives and diversions program, also other programs on the front end. We can keep people out, especially those suffering from addiction, suffering from mental health. It makes no sense to incarcerate so many people who are struggling with those issues, who are struggling with poverty. And so we can start to give people opportunities for earned release. There are many people still eligible for parole who haven't been given a real fair shot at being released early under parole, who've done everything that's been asked of them, all the programming. There's people who were sentenced under the new law, under truth in sentencing, who could be released under the earned release program. That program has been underutilized. There's a compassionate release program that would give people an opportunity, especially who are older, as Shar-Ron mentioned, is really a program very underutilized that can be used, especially to take care of, to get people who are most vulnerable, the sickest individuals within the system. A lot of older people can be moved out immediately through compassionate release. Then on the back end, I mentioned revocations with no new conviction. That's 3,000 people going back to prison each year, no new conviction, just for revocations with no new conviction attached to that. That practice has to end, but then by doing that, we reduce the prison population by half. Then we can start closing prisons down. We can start reducing the overcrowding that was mentioned before, and that's really a key to improving conditions of confinement and to get people that space that's needed for, especially when they're facing extreme heat. So that's a really crucial factor. And then we can start to reinvest resources. We can start to put resources back into improving conditions of confinement, into programming that would help currently incarcerated people flourish. Also, we can start redirecting resources back into the communities that have been most harmed by incarceration. We can connect people with jobs, housing, healthcare, treatment services, educational programming, violence prevention programming. And so all that makes a lot of sense. And particularly, there's also, I want to mention, there's also been legislation introduced in the state of Wisconsin that would control the temperature within prisons, so that no person would ever be faced with excessive heat or with facing excessive cold. Last session there was an entire package of bills introduced by Representative Brian Clancy and Representative Taryn Madison, and one of those bills specifically addressed the issue of excessive heat so that it would mandate that no prison could ever get above 76 degrees and or below 68 degrees, I believe it was. So there's that temperature so that it wouldn't be possible within Wisconsin prison system to have people going through this torture of excessive heat. And so, unfortunately, there was a lot of political posturing among both Republicans and Democrats, and it never got up for a hearing. So regardless of whether a Republican introduces it or a Democrat introduces it, it's something we need to really call on Republicans and Democrats, others to work together. It's time to put the political posturing aside and start to move forward policies that are gonna save people's lives, that are gonna end this inhumane treatment, and start really ensuring that all people within the prison system are treated with dignity and respect. So there's a real opportunity to move that forward this upcoming legislative session. We really got to call on Republicans and Democrats to put all this political posturing aside and start to move forward common sense policy this legislative session, and particularly ending extreme heat, ending all forms of torture within the Wisconsin prison system. At the federal level, there's been a bill introduced called the Correctional Facility Disaster Preparedness Act. Senator Cory Booker and Senator Tammy Duckworth introduced this bill, and essentially this bill would require prisons at the federal level to ensure that there's some sort of emergency management program in place in every single federal prison to ensure that any time there's a public health emergency, any type of natural disaster, that ensures that these prisons will have that plan in place so that the lives and well-being of currently incarcerated people and the staff within those prisons are protected. And we need that sort of legislation at the state level, the local level, all over the country. But that's a bill that the Just Us Coordinating Council has been leading on. A lot of the recommendations from that bill came from us, came from directly impacted people. Just Us Coordinating Council has been leading on at the national level. And so that's really crucial because a lot of other places like nursing homes, college dormitories, on the outside, they already have those policies in place they have to have emergency management programs in place. But unfortunately, that's not carried over. It doesn't impact currently incarcerated people. So if there's any type of public health emergency, we saw during the COVID crisis, for example, a lot of people, the policy was to leave people there to die in a lot of cases that there wasn't, and also would enable, emergency decarceration, as I was talking about. So in the case of extreme heat, if, we need to move that forward, get people out of those dangerous prison conditions. And so the next steps, for more information about the work that we do with Wisdom, you can visit wisdomwisconsin.org. That's the website to get involved. We actually have a statewide task force that focuses on solitary confinement and conditions of confinement. We're actually meeting tonight, but definitely, send us, email, contact me personally, or contact us through the website to get involved, and we'll definitely, let people know the opportunities to get involved with that. But this certainly, is one of the issues that excessive heat, conditions of confinement. This is one of the issues that's definitely a priority issue for us with Wisdom, and also the Just Us Coordinating Council. You can find more information at justuscc.org. So JUSTCC.org to learn more about the national level work that's being led by directly impacted people, where we're actually, it's a crucial component because just about every other constituency group has created a policy table in DC at the national level to have that consistent presence on the Hill. And we need that as formerly incarcerated people, as people who've been impacted by the carceral system. It's really, a pivotal moment for us when we launch that Just Us Coordinating Council. So definitely check that out and learn more about that work that we're doing. And also, definitely we're calling on people to move this legislation forward at the state level. Contact all your legislators, Republicans, Democrats, and tell them it's time to move forward common sense legislation that will save lives, that will ensure that all people within the prison system are treated with dignity and respect, including staff, including currently incarcerated people. And so it's really time now for the change to start to move forward. This is really a pivotal time in the history of Wisconsin, the history of this country. So we're asking people to take action, no more political posturing. Let's get through that and start to create some real change in the state. Thank you. I'll hand it over to James.
Good afternoon. I'm James Morgan. I'm the community organizer for Moses here in Dane County. Moses stands for Madison Organized in Strength, Equity, and Solidarity. We are the local affiliate for Wisdom. Conditions of confinement, extreme heat. I was incarcerated for over 24 and a half years. I've been in almost every state facility here in the state of Wisconsin and 4 years in Tennessee. I'll cut to the chase. The walls sweat. I spent time at Sturtevant Correctional Facility in Racine. The temperatures were so hot, the walls sweat. Their solution was to take our uniforms, cut the long legs off, and require us to wear shorts in a cell 23 hours a day where the walls sweat. I've spent time in Waupun Correctional Institution where the walls sweat and the paint peels, where it's difficult to breathe, where it's difficult to engage in any type of activity that's normal. Same thing at Green Bay Correctional Institution. And the walls sweat. I'm going to repeat that because I've written about it. As a student while incarcerated with the UW Odyssey program, I wrote an essay about this almost 20 years ago. So these conditions of confinement are extreme, and they cause mental, physical, and emotional harm to other human beings. I'm gonna say that again, other human beings, not inmates or the current rhetoric, persons in our care, other human beings. What we're really talking about here is we are not only asking, we're demanding that our government, that our officials begin to understand that this is a human condition. In my work, I seek to work with people who understand the human condition. Not black, not white, not Republican, not Democrat, but to take the necessary steps to ensure that people, regardless of the bad choices and decisions that they have made, continue to be seen as valuable and human. These conditions, whether we want to accept it or not, are terroristic. And they're sponsored by the state of Wisconsin. And there's people who we need to hold accountable, both Democrat, Republican, Independent, and the citizens of the state of Wisconsin need to understand that every tax dollar that's taken from them contributes to this. So I simply want to say to you all, delve deeper. Do some more research. Do not remain silent. And I'm going to say a reminder helps to remind. I'm going to be brief. A reminder helps to remind. You all sweat. Thank you.
First and foremost, we just want to extend a quick thank you to all of our three speakers. And at this time, we can open the floor to any discussions and any questions that you guys have for them.
Sure.
Did you know if the death certificates specify whether people have died from heat exhaustion?
Well, that's a very good question. And we saw evidence of this, particularly during the COVID-19 situation. What happens is when an individual becomes sick in prison, they transfer them out of prison. They send them to a community hospital. And it is there that that person dies. So even though that person, the death certificate may reflect that they died from heat exhaustion, it will not be heat exhaustion while they were in prison. They died in the community from heat exhaustion. And we saw the same thing with COVID-19, which is why the Department of Correction has such a low level of individuals who are dying. When they get sick, they get transferred to the hospital. When they die, the death certificate reflects that they died in the community.
Do you have any record of people from prison who died in community hospitals, but where the death certificate specifies heat exhaustion?
I don't have that information on me, but this information is readily attainable in regards to, well, it will require you to do something that I call shepherdizing. You have to, one, see where that person was prior to them dying, on the date, say January 1. If they were in Waupun on December 25th, it's relatively reasonable to correlate that that person fell ill there, and then you would have to say that they died a couple of days afterwards. So that information is readily available. You can go to the Department of Corrections website, and they have what's known as an inmate locator. The inmate locator will not only tell you where the inmate is located, but the person in their care, or as James says, the resident, which I agree 100%, James, where that person was, but give you the history of where that person was, and most importantly, the dates of where that person was. So if you wanted to shepherd,ize on January 1st, we're located at Waupun Correctional Institution. On January 3rd, they died at Waupun Memorial Hospital. You'd be able to draw that correlation.
Another question. You mentioned that someone had a lawsuit that could settle for $9,000. What was that about?
Well, we had one person, I don't have her name with me right now, but she received a settlement for heat-related injury that she suffered. And they did not include that personal demographic information, but they had to report that they paid that person $9,000. And again, that is readily findable as well. You can go to the Department of Corrections website and you can actually find that information.
I have a question. So, Mark, you had mentioned that people in power, like the Wisconsin state legislator and the governor, have the total power to help reduce the prison populations in Wisconsin. Why do you think those people in power haven't acted on that when they have the power to do so?
I believe it's a lack of courage. There was, particularly with Governor Evers, there have been a lot of political attacks. We saw it in the last two major elections where there's been a lot of attempts to dehumanize directly impacted people, a lot of rhetoric that James was talking about labeling us as violent criminals, offenders, all this dehumanizing language put out there. And I think that's a real factor. There's a lot of money, there's huge levels of money, millions of dollars being put into these ads to build this narrative of dehumanization of people who've been directly impacted by the system. And we don't have the resources to counter that. We build a counter narrative. We don't have nearly the resources to counter some of what we're seeing at the national level, with all this money coming down, being put into these attacks, particularly on Democratic candidates. And also, there's that factor of money. There's that interest. It's an industry, multi-billion-dollar industry that is entrenched, and so there's that interest that people have, and it's tied to money being put into the elections, and then just the lack of courage and political will, a lot of political posturing. But we've seen some progress as well. It's not all totally a loss of hope. We've seen Republicans and legislators come together to increase funding for treatment alternatives and diversions in the state budget. There's been consistently increases in that. There's nearly unanimous support for that. We saw there was a bill that actually passed out of the Senate, I believe with only 3 votes opposed, around mental health TAD. So treatment alternatives and diversions right now can only be used for a person who has a co-occurring issue with both substance use and mental health. If it's a mental health only, it can't be used for just mental health program only, but this bill would have expanded TAD, treatment alternatives and diversions, so that it can be used for mental health program, and it had almost unanimous support in the Senate, but unfortunately the Assembly killed it and didn't even let it up for a vote. We had support for a bill that would have ended juvenile life without parole that actually got a hearing and had Republican support, actually passed out of committee, but never came up for a vote. So there's some of that. We've seen, even some Republican legislators start to talk about the issues from a humanity-based perspective, to understand, to recognize the capacity, especially for youth, to change, to grow and develop, and that we shouldn't automatically give youth life sentences, and started to say there should be a second look sentencing process. So there's certainly Republicans in both the Senate and Assembly that we're starting to use some of that language. And so I feel like there's even a split among Republicans. Even some Democrats have been, it's not a partisan issue. There's been Democrats and Republicans who've been terrible around the issue. We had a major action around the '94 crime bill, which was one of the most devastating bills at the federal level, which both Republicans and Democrats supported. So oftentimes it was Republicans and Democrats working together to build up this system. And now it's really time for them to work together to start to reduce much of the harm. I think we can agree on some of the certain issues around, particularly public health, mental health, torture. I'm hoping that people can understand that this is torture, that it's not acceptable, and the vast majority of people within the Wisconsin prison system are going to be coming home. So we really need to invest in the development, health, and growth and development of people who are currently incarcerated in order to build safer, stronger, healthier communities. And that investment starts when people are incarcerated. To really, instead of, like I said before, it's really time to invest in health instead of punishment. And it's time for both Republicans and Democrats to show the courage to really step up, take action. And of course, they're going to fear the potential political consequences in the sort of primary, but it's, it takes courage, and we need to show them. There's people all throughout the state. There's many people, there's public surveys that show there's broad support for many of these issues, many of these changes. So it's just time. We had a survey at one point that showed 55% of people in the state of Wisconsin actually support cutting the prison population in half through those policies that I mentioned before, by expanding treatment alternatives on the front end, by giving people a fair chance to be released under parole, and by ending reincarceration for revocation with no new conviction on the back end through public policy polling. And so I feel like that's the sort of thing. And fair maps is going to, change the political landscape as well. So I think with the changing political landscape, I'm optimistic that we are going to see those changes and still have hope for humanity.
Why don't they act? I think it's simple. Because I've talked with some legislators and I've been in some of their hearings. And for those of us who, when we say system impacted, we're not just talking about people who have physically occupied a prison cell. We're all impacted. But many of them have shared with me that they're there to represent their constituents. And their constituents, and many of them, separate from the individuals who find themselves having to navigate these realities, have a different reality. We speak a different language. The language has a lot to do with it. The economy, the economics of it has a lot to do with it. But what I always challenge, whether they're representatives, senators, or whatever, is to remind them that the decisions and choices that they make impact every citizen of the state. Not just northern Wisconsin, southern Wisconsin, every citizen. So when one says to me, well, my constituents, that's not good enough for me. That's why I consistently ask the citizens of the state to pay attention to their representatives, to the legislators. What language do they speak? Language is the currency of power. I've sat in these hearings and said, listen to them say, well, we need to go into committee because there's one word in this piece of legislation that we need to change. And then we'll all be in agreement. It's the language. And if you have people making decisions about other people or other human beings who have a totally different experience and realities, there's no correlation between relationships and outcomes. It doesn't matter to you what happens to them because they're invisible to you. There's no connection there. That's why I say it's a matter of humanity and human conditioning. I want to share a quick reality. This is not a story. I sat in Walpond Correctional Institution and I met a gentleman by the name of Dr. James Cameron. Dr. James Cameron built the Black Holocaust Museum that is located in Milwaukee right now. And he told me back in the 80s that he perceived that I had a work to do in this community. I couldn't connect to that because I was sent in prison with a 55-year sentence. But Dr. Cameron said to me, sharing his reality, watching two of his friends being lynched in Marion, Indiana in the 1940s, that people who would be allies in this work that we do would not be black people, would not be white people, it would be people who understood the human condition. And that has stuck with me ever since. So when I engage in these conversations, again, with, and I use this term lightly, the powers that be, because I agree with Mark, it takes courage. And where is their courage? I'm somewhat of a historian. People like Nelson Mandela stepped into places of courage to do what was needed and necessary for the nation. Why are they not considering what's good for the citizens of this state? Are they affiliates with ALEC and others, okay, for political reasons, to ensure that those who invest in this industry, because it is a prison industry complex, industrial complex, it's been around. I started writing about it in the 80s while I sat in prison, as I watched them shift funds from your education system to your prisons, right here in the state of Wisconsin. This is nothing new. 40 years ago, I read articles about how difficult it would be for an individual like me, a black man, to be in the state of Wisconsin because of its rate of incarceration. This is not a new story, this is a reality. And it's going to take other human beings to figure out what the mechanism of accountability will look like. And accountability begins with your vote. And understanding propaganda, and understanding emotional manipulation, and how it's creating these spaces for these things to occur. All right? So, you know, as I stand here, I can't vote. I'm on parole until the year 2038. I went to prison in 1983. Where's the investment? You know how many millions and millions of dollars they spend to track me every single day with a satellite? Make it make sense. That's what we're saying. Make it make sense. Because right now, it's not making sense. The state of Wisconsin received national attention because you've had deaths in these prisons. I stood on the steps of that Capitol. And here's what I know. If it had been an animal shelter, there would have been an outcry across this state that we would still be hearing today. An animal shelter. Do this to a dog or a cat and watch how many people protest. These are human beings. There's accountability to be called for.
You know, I'm the practical person, not saying that I deal strictly with numbers. I'm a PhD candidate right now, all with dissertation. So to be qualitative and quantitative data is extremely important. This is not to discount anything that either gentleman say, because I personally know that what they're saying is true. But we have to focus less on opinion and more on this data. So the question that you presented to us is, why hasn't anything changed? Well, there's no incentive for it to change. These legislators that James were referring to, they have constituents. And their constituents tell them, we don't want things to change. Why do they tell them that? Because they vote for it, right? There is no reason for Governor Evers to change what he has been doing. There's no reason for him to commute sentences. Why should he commute sentences? Because he has been elected. And when he has been elected, he's been elected with an overwhelming majority of the vote. That is the voters telling him that they like what he has done. Now there's a disconnect there, right? The disconnect is that many individuals don't know exactly what has been done. And we have various propaganda, as Mark said, that has been put out in front of individuals. And what they don't recognize is that the financial implications of the correctional system, not just in Wisconsin, but throughout the United States of America, are very significant. I want you to consider the son or daughter of a prison guard. Well, they gotta pay for college tuition too, right? They got a mortgage that they gotta pay. They've gotta pay a car payment every single month. That police officer who's working overtime, he's got a house note that he's gotta meet every month. There is a financial incentive to keep the system exactly the way it is. Because if you change that system, then you will disrupt the way the individuals are afforded to live their lives. Now, I hope that answers your questions from 3 different perspectives.
Has there ever been a problem in regard to the lack of heat in prisons?
Yes, well, we focus primarily today on heat in prisons because we know that heat can lead to all types of negative outcomes. But I want you to imagine, once again now, remember there's no AC, there's no heat in certain locations as well. But in my presentation here, I alluded to the fact that individuals will block vents. So let's say wintertime comes, or for those of you who live in apartment buildings, you know that in some apartment buildings, they turn on the boiler in about October. Up until October 15th, the boiler is off, so you have no heat. So even if it drops to 20 below zero, you can't turn your heat on because the boiler in the building is off. But that's the same principle in many of the institutions that we have. The boilers are not turned on until a specific day. So if it gets cold in Waupun and the boiler's not due to be turned on until November 1st, and it's snowing on October 25th, and it drops to below zero, you are out of luck, right? And then simultaneously, once the boiler comes on, the heat coming out of those vents, in many cases, we said that it's between 80 and 84 degrees. is coming into the room at 84 degrees. So now you have someone who attempts to control their environment by blocking that vent. When they block this vent here, it sends the heat going to all the other places that it's connected to. So the other individuals have to suffer. So what does Mark do? He blocks his vent, right? But James can't block his, all right? Okay, so I blocked mine, Mark blocked his, James has to suffer that consequence until an officer comes and makes you take down the blockage. Does that answer your question,
Yes,
sir?
are you all familiar with the report that was done by some MIT scientists last month? Did you draw data from that?
Yeah, I think from my understanding, that was where all the mortality rates came from, that like 5% increase in mortality when there's a 10-degree spike in a day. That's where that
Yes,
information all came
6.7%
from.
as well. Yeah, the cold conditions are just as deleterious to your health as the hot conditions. There's only one difference. You can usually put on a jacket. You can put on extra clothes. You can put on gloves inside that cell. You can wrap yourself up in a blanket. But when it's 90 degrees inside a cell, you can strip buck naked and you're still gonna suffer those consequences. That's the reason why we're focused so heavily, so acutely, so specifically on this heat issue. Okay, there is no way and there is nothing that you can do when the walls sweat. Are there any other questions? Cosette?
Alright, I just want to say thank you everyone for attending today's press conference. We hope you're able to understand the pressing conditions, climate-wise, that have been experiencing for past incarcerated individuals and are still present today, and the reason behind necessary change in these systems. This concludes our press conference. Thank you so much for attending.